to resist government oppression, you don't need a majority. You need brave people who are willing to speak up. And we had some of that during the lockdowns, not nearly as much as I wanted. But later we would discover that those who were speaking up and risking their careers and their families and their livelihoods, they were being systematically suppressed by tech companies at the behest of governments.
This is Virtuous Leaders, the podcast for based Catholics who will speak truth, do good, or die trying. Here's the show.
MSNBC called you the second worst person in the world. You recently produced a docu-series on Fauci called The Cover-Up. But don't you think everyone would be happier if we just let experts rule the world?
You know, there's that instinct we all have to trust the expert, and it's particularly true when you're going to the doctor, right? Once the lab coat is on, you're going to defer everything to that guy. But I don't know, like I think something about Americans is quite the opposite of that we don't trust authority, we don't trust experts, we don't trust power, and there's a mindset that says, I want to figure that stuff out for myself.
Do you think Fauci's going to go to jail?
Yes, I do. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've heard a prominent person really actually have confidence in that view. What makes you so confident? I I hope that justice is served. I'd like to hear your explanation.
Well, it has everything to do with Senator Rand Paul, who made it a point of getting on the appropriate committee. What is it? It's the Government Oversight Committee. I'm forgetting the name of it at the moment, but he is now the chairman, and he is the chairman with subpoena power. And there's a whole controversy stirring around Joe Biden's auto pen, right? And apparently one of the pardons that was auto penned and potentially illegitimate was Tony Fauci's pardon. But either way, he is only pardoned for crimes he's committed in the past. And when Senator Rand Paul, with his subpoena power, insists that Fauci come testify before the committee, he has two choices: tell the truth or commit perjury, which opens him up to new criminal charges. And, assuming that the Trump Justice Department is willing to actually pursue that, yes, Anthony Fauci will go to jail for the crimes he committed, or he'll explain to us for the first time who he was working for, because I don't think Anthony Fauci was the grand architect of lockdowns and gain-of-function research and all of these crimes against humanity. But I do think that I want to know who his boss is. And I have theories, but I'd like to know.
May I ask what your theories are?
Sure. So we did this series called The Cover-Up, and it was really born out of a conversation I was having with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya in 2020, maybe 2021. It's probably early 21. And about the boom in funding for NIAID, which Tony Fauci headed up, and NIH. And it was explicitly tied to the government's newly declared war on terror, and specifically bioterror. That was part of it wasn't a Patriot Act, but it was part of that cluster of panic legislation that created a lot of monsters. And that led me to ask the question, well, was this even a public health response, or was this a military intelligence style mad science experiment? And that's what we proceeded to uncover in the Cover-Up, particularly talking to a guy named Dr. Richard Ebright, who's at Rutgers and was Anthony Fauci's nemesis going all the way back to 2001 when they started doing all of these wild experiments. So it's, to me, the whole question is, at the time, according to Ebright, Fauci was tapped by Vice President Dick Cheney. But I believe that Fauci's boss may well be at the CIA or Homeland Security, maybe DOD. And these are the agencies that I think were running the show, and it really had nothing to do with public health.
Is the Trump administration living up to its campaign promises?
I would say mostly no. And the exception to that, I think, is what RFK Jr. is doing at HHS and what Marty Makary is doing at FDA and what Jay Bhattacharya is doing at NIH. I think they're moving in the right direction. And I think people that are criticizing them perhaps don't appreciate how big the mess is that they're trying to unravel and how powerful the interests are that they're taking on. But on things like spending, you can't actually unwind the deep state without actually going after the spending that undercuts it. And Doge had all that promise, and I did a lot of work on Doge. But if they don't deal with it on the budgetary side, they're just rearranging deck chairs. And the next administration can reverse virtually everything that they do in a way that they should have, in my mind, pursued pushing good things through the Senate in the same way that they pushed some of Trump's better and most controversial nominees through the Senate, like RFK Jr., like Tulsi Gabbard. Jay Bhattacharya was not that controversial because he is disarmingly honest and a gentle guy, as you probably know. But if you're going to defund the deep state, which I think needs to be done, I think it's out of control. And I think what we were just talking about with gain of function research is very part and parcel of that. But if you're going to do it, you got to actually do it. You can't just do it by executive order.
Why isn't Trump delivering?
That is a bit of a mystery. And that I'll give you a specific example. He's spending a lot of time attacking Rand Paul these days, and has not only endorsed Lindsey Graham, who is about as deep state as it gets, neoconservative deep stater, never saw a forever war that he didn't like. I wish he would have chosen to work more with Rand Paul and spent his ire going after Lindsey Graham and forcing Lindsey Graham to fall into line, because Lindsey Graham is up for a primary election next spring, and he easily could have put pressure on Lindsey Graham to fall into line instead of Rand Paul. I don't know why he didn't choose to do that. You could argue that maybe these were more campaign promises than policy commitments, but it's very disappointing to me.
It's very concerning for people who really put their hopes in Trump, for better or for worse. And I hope that there will be a future candidate who will be better, but that's no guarantee.
Yeah, I mean, everything we do. So I'm a recovering political activist. I was involved in the Tea Party movement and very involved in the Republican class of 2010, which was a historic shift in power from the Democrats. And we elected guys like Congressman Thomas Massie, Senator Rand Paul, but also people that I'm less proud of, like Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and senators like that. But I've come to understand, I always knew this, but I think it's important to say this again and again and again, that politics is downstream of culture. And the values and ideas that animate civil society are ultimately going to create the political choices that you're confronted with. And if you wait until a presidential election and see who the Democrats have to offer and see who the Republicans have to offer, you're going to discover getting the same thing over and over again, and increasing American cynicism in the political process. Not that many people know this, but there's more registered independents than there are Republicans and Democrats. But I think we have to, this is sort of we have to recapture, that's the wrong word, but reanimate popular culture with these ideas based on what I believe to be very American ideas. ideas about freedom and responsibility and the potential to do what you will with your life as long as you don't hurt people or take their stuff. I think that is there. It's in all of Americans, but politics manipulates us and exploits us and scares us into agreeing to do things that we wouldn't otherwise do.
You're living out that mission with your initiatives. How do you see your initiatives playing a role in this?
Well, we believe that the best ideas are presented as a story and as a human story. And I'll give you a specific example of that. So we produce documentaries, we do short explainers, we're producing a lot of comedy. I'm about to do a lot of really cool stuff with the iconic Saturday Night Live comedian Rob Schneider. But the idea is that the gateway to ideas is a human story, or it might be a joke. It's something that resonates far beyond sort of political tribalism. And we did during lockdowns. I became obsessed with the potentially catastrophic outcomes of lockdowns in early March when they first started talking about shutting down the world. And that year we made a documentary, a tragic story about a dad who's in Brooklyn trying to save his family restaurant that was in the family. He built this restaurant with his father, so it was everything to him. And in the middle of lockdown, struggling financially to try to keep his restaurant open in New York City, his son develops grand mal seizures. And you remember at the time, the mayor and the governor of New York had decided that they knew how to manage hospital flow, as if they could know anything about managing hospital flow and healthcare. And they declared that only people with COVID could go to the hospital. And this young man, after some initial visits to a doctor, he was turned down, and he dies. He dies because he can't get the treatment he wants because politics has taken over healthcare. And we don't talk about Andrew Cuomo, and we don't talk about the mayor of New York City, and we don't talk about the politics of lockdowns or the economics of it. We just tell the story of what Fred lost. And that documentary is a short, and that documentary ended up being selected as the best COVID film in the New York Shorts Festival. And I am going to posit that not a single person that judged that film opposed lockdowns or vaccine mandates or mask mandates or you can't go to work because you're non-essential mandates. But when you tell it as a human story that everyone can relate to, it's about a visceral consequence, a loss resulting from a mindless policy. I think everybody gets that. They get it in that way. So, but if I had done an economist thing with statistics and numbers and charts, not a single person would have been persuaded. So that's kind of our model. We want to touch people's hearts because I think as an economist, I think about things with a certain economic logic. But I don't think most people's brains are wired that way. They process the world through the people they trust and their emotions and the human connection they have with others. And that's what we try to do at Free the People.
You call it a documentary. So this is based on a true story.
Yes. 100% true story. And happily, the restaurant is still surviving, barely. But if you know anything about the economics of cities post-lockdowns, they've changed people's behavior patterns. People don't go to work in cities so much anymore. So there's a fundamental disruption there that I think is going to have more damage long-term than any of us will realize for quite some time.
I think your approach is very wise. You said that politics is downstream of culture. The classical adage is culture has the force of law, or custom has the force of law. In the Republic, Plato said that the poets rule the city. The poets are the ones who provide the dominant images that influence people beyond their conscious awareness. And I think that's precisely what you're identifying and speaking to with your emphasis on stories. That's very wise.
Yeah, and I'm a libertarian. I still use that word. It may not be perfect, but it's pretty useful to describe what I am. And I believe in rules of conduct, and I believe that those rules come from people figuring out how to survive and cooperate and thrive with each other. And so it's not that some legislator came along and passed a law. It's because people had come to this consensus that shouldn't hurt people, shouldn't take their stuff. I mean, it kind of comes out of Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments. These are ingrained in human beings, and if you believe that to be true, you better focus on culture, not trying to go to Washington to pass another law. You could tomorrow you could pass a law that said Americans should drive on the other side of the street, and they're probably not going to do it, and probably a lot of people are going to get hurt with this arbitrary mandate coming from government. But I think you could describe almost every good sounding law in the same way. They're trying to do something that has to be done through a social consensus to focus on problem solving from the bottom up. Not, you don't outsource compassion. You can't outsource integrity. You have to own that yourself. And that to me is the core of what a libertarian is.
I'm curious to hear how optimistic you are in seeing your goal fulfilled through the method that you're using, and what's holding you back from 10xing your impact.
So the challenge for us is always the fact that our distribution methods are social media platforms. And as we lived through with COVID and discovering when Elon Musk bought Twitter, we discovered all of these same alphabet intelligence and defense agencies that I was referring to earlier had this incredibly granular censorship model that was designed to suppress certain voices and certain ideas. And that's still there. There's been no dismantling of that. And the reality is, X under Elon Musk is much better than it was under that bureaucracy that had evolved as Jack got out of it. But it's still a top-down system, and someone is still deciding how you how and if you get to speak to other people. So that's an ongoing problem of not so much deplatforming, but suppression of subversive ideas that someone somewhere in some agency has decided is unacceptable. That said, it's so much radically more liberating than it was when I was a kid, and you had 3 TV networks, and Walter Cronkite gave you 20 minutes of allocated news. You didn't actually know where that allocation originated, but at the end of this, you might remember he said, "That's the way it is." And if you say that's the way it is on Twitter, trust me, you're going to get fact-checked and challenged and argued with. And out of that dynamic, it's something like what I was describing with the engagement of free people in a civil society. I think you're going to get closer to the truth by allowing people robustly to express their opinions and argue them out. And that is so much more dynamic with social media, but it's also a top-down system. So we're still anxiously awaiting blockchain technologies that allow us to have unlimited conversation. And I think we're headed there.
You believe that the U.S. and by extension the world is being run by a bunch of devil-worshipping pedophiles?
I think that, so I've listened to Tucker Carlson on this, and I find some of who was the guy he was talking about,
The Martyr Maid guy. Yeah, his name escapes me.
Yeah, but the sick pedophile artwork that
Oh
I
yeah,
think
that
it's
was
Tony
Tony
Podesta. Is
Podesta.
that right?
Yeah, yeah. Tony Podesta
Yeah.
was the nerd guy that artwork.
I, I would love to hear his explanation for that, because it doesn't sit right with me. But I do think that there is a elite globalist community that very much fancies themselves our keepers. They think they're smarter than us. They think they're of the right families. Like the original Progressive Project was going to put the right families taught at the right universities, and you're going to give them all this power to shepherd the rest of us in a progressively thoughtful way. I think that is very real, and I think you'll discover going back to COVID and lockdowns. One of the things that I discovered, or at least I put these threads together. I don't know what the end of the story is, but I don't think it was an accident that this intelligence cooperative called the Five Eyes, and the Five Eyes are basically the English speaking countries that collaborate and share intelligence and collude on whatever it is they're colluding on. And it's the U.S. and Canada, the U.K., New Zealand, and Australia. They all locked down the hardest and most aggressively early on, and they really led the world on that. That is a globalist thing, right? That is a centrally planned, top down. We're smarter than you. We have the knowledge to do this stuff from the top down. That stuff is very real, and I think that's precisely what we need to unwind. And I hope it's not too late to reassert American sovereignty on that.
How do you wake people up from the apathy and ignorance? Would say that, well, it's just too difficult for globalists to rule the world. It's not going to happen. There are conspiracy theories, etc.
Um, I actually think they went too far on lockdowns. I think that is the great awakening,
They revealed their hand too
and
soon.
yeah, they revealed their hand, and I think they're going to have a very hard time implementing the next central plan. And I think their hope is that it's going to be climate change. I suspect, but that they might change gears and they might make it about war. They might God knows what they'll try to do to us. But I think we discovered that there is a censorship industrial complex. Is this cabal of elitists, guys like Bill Gates, that very much view mere humans as sort of cogs in a wheel, or you know a program with a bug that needs to be fixed. That's his mindset, right? He's a software engineer, and I think that really rubs people the wrong way. And by the way, to resist government oppression, you don't need a majority. You need brave people who are willing to speak up. And we had some of that during the lockdowns, not nearly as much as I wanted. But later we would discover that those who were speaking up and risking their careers and their families and their livelihoods, they were being systematically suppressed by tech companies at the behest of governments. And you have this, right now, the Digital Services Act that the EU has imposed on EU nations, and the UK is even more aggressive. I was having this conversation yesterday. They have a legislation, non-criminal hate activity, which is something that you say that the authorities don't like, and they're going to come knocking on your door and they're going to put you on a list, but it's not a crime. And it's so Orwellian, it's hard to even imagine. I think all of this ham-fisted censorship stuff is exposing the machine for what it's trying to do to us. And I have to be optimistic about that, but I see it happening.
Well, I respect you, man, because you are a fearless truth speaker. At what point do you start to fear for your own life?
I was thinking about this in the context of Charlie Kirk's assassination. The good news for me, if you Google me from 12, 14 years ago, I would have been viewed as one of the leaders of the Tea Party movement. And I was spending a lot of time on mainstream media, and I was going on Bill Maher, and I was like the whipping boy for my progressive betters. Back then, it wasn't so hostile, it wasn't so violent, but I see the same dynamic where the Tea Party ultimately was undermined by the Republican Party hijacking it. And when we first started electing people like Rand Paul and Mike Lee and Thomas Massey and Justin Amash, the list goes on and on. We caught them by surprise, and we actually replaced a lot of senior Republican senators for life with better candidates. But I think they're now on to that, and I don't think I'm at risk, but I do think that anyone that tries to fundamentally undermine the order, and politics is really where the rubber hits the road. I don't know exactly what happened to Charlie, but I do know that he mattered in a very visceral political way that was viewed as a threat.
So I've been asking you a lot of questions here. I want to give you a chance to just go off on any rant that you want to. You have a lot of different ideas, and I do a lot of initiatives. What would you like the world to hear?
So my obsession at the moment, I'm spending more and more time on foreign policy, and I'm a non-interventionist and a realist when it comes to foreign policy. I think a lot of so-called nation building is a form of central planning, and it's that arrogant and it's that naive that to think that you could go in and take over Afghanistan and somehow set up a Western democracy in that country. That was a colossal failure. Millions of people died. Billions and billions of people, billions and billions of dollars were spent
Trillions.
in that process. And I think going back to to one of the early questions about the budget, like if you want to defund the deep state, you have to cut their budgets. If you actually want to eliminate this massive debt ledge that's going to make our children and grandchildren so poor, you're going to have to do something about forever wars. You're going to have to get Republicans to do something about forever wars because Democrats aren't any better, with a few exceptions. And you're going to have to do something about the surveillance state and this very controlling top-down set of agencies. I guess we call it the deep state now. And until we do that, we're not going to be able to fix the other problems. So I've been spending more and more time on foreign policy, both as a principled non-interventionist. I don't think we have enough knowledge to actually reorganize a country like Afghanistan or Venezuela, more to the current point. But I also don't think realistically we appreciate just how much damage you do. There's a reason why Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro have endured, and it had a lot to do with American intervention through USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, all these things that we say that we're unplugging now. So focus on foreign policy and don't take the bait of this is going to be easy, it's going to be simple. Nicolas Maduro is a really bad guy. He needs to be replaced, because we're already seeing the fallout in Syria from regime change. And I'm not at all convinced that the new boss is any better than the last boss.
Matt, how can people follow you?
You can find us find me at Kibbe on X, my favorite platform, on Instagram, I have a big Facebook page, but it doesn't get much action because Facebook is a horrible place to be. And more importantly, go to freethepeople.org to see the kind of video content we produce. I do a show on Blaze TV. We produce a lot of documentaries, explainers, comedy. It's all there, and it's organized in a way that you can find what you want and leave the rest.
Thanks for speaking truth, Matt.
Thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. See you next time.